Hey everybody, I just want to chime in here. I think we have something really special in store for you today, and I'm really excited about it. One of the great things about Stephen King collecting and being part of collecting communities is how much you learn. And I have been collecting for a long time, and I still learn new things every day. For years, my focus has been on the books themselves. Books such as Night Shift in the original version and in the Cemetery Dance limited edition. And in the copyright page in both of these books, it indicates that the stories contained therein first appeared in X magazine, X month, whatever. I've known that. I always have known that. But it never occurred to me that somebody could actually or would actually collect the magazines to get to the actual first appearance of these stories. And Stephen King has written hundreds of stories, and a lot of them have been collected in collections such as Night Shift, Skeleton Crew, Nightmares and Dreamscapes, Everything's Eventual. But a lot of the stories have never been collected. They are still floating around out there. And so the way to get to the very first appearance is to track down the magazine, the online, downloadable, whatever the format was. If you want to get to the very first appearance, that's where you have to go, and that's what you have to do. And my friend Noah, I've learned so much from him about collecting, and he has an amazing collection of books and then just keeps going. He has an amazing collection of magazines to display and to demonstrate the first appearance of these stories. And so he's talked about the limited editions of Night Shift. He showed the first editions, the first trade editions of Night Shift. And we had the idea to do a video where he actually shows the first appearance of the stories in Night Shift. Not all of them had been published before the book came out, but most of them had. And as it happens to be, Noah has all of those first appearances, which I just think is fascinating. So start with the 16 pre-published stories in the original version of Night Shift, and then the two bonus stories, Weeds and The Glass Floor. Glass Floor was the first professional sale of Stephen King's career. And that came out, was published for the first time in book form by Cemetery Dance in their special edition. And Noah, of course, because he's Noah, because he's awesome, has the actual legit first appearance in a magazine. So I'm gonna turn it over to Noah, and he's gonna go through the table of contents of Night Shift and show these first appearances. I think that this is fascinating. I hope that you'll find it fascinating as well. And without further ado, here's Noah.
Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about the short stories that appear in the collection Night Shift. We're going to do this in the order that they appear in the collection. The first story is Jerusalem's Lot. This story was original to the collection. It had never before been printed, so I'm going to skip over that one. The next one is Graveyard Shift. So Graveyard Shift was published in 1970. So that was the year King graduated from college. He graduated from college in May, and up until that point, the only fiction he had sold, so the only short stories that were published by then were mostly in college magazines, college newspapers, things like Ubris and Onan and whatnot. He had sold two short stories to Startling Mystery Stories, and one in 1967 and one in 1969. But that was it. Those two were his only professionally sold stories. Graveyard Shift was the first one he had sold as a college graduate, and it appeared for the first time in the October 1970 issue of Cavalier Magazine. Cavalier Magazine was, I guess still is, I don't know, like a men's magazine, and like most of these men's magazines in the 70s, 60s, 70s, they had a market for fiction that was not, you know, mainstream fiction and genre fiction. It wasn't necessarily erotica. It was like normal. It was like, you know, horror stories or science fiction or what have you. So the fiction editor at Cavalier Magazine was a guy called Nye Wilden. And Nye Wilden purchased the story Graveyard Shift for the October issue of Cavalier. And it started a relationship that King had with Cavalier, and throughout the 70s, many of the short stories were published in this magazine. As you will see coming up, many of those collected in Night Shift first appeared in Cavalier. So this was the first, Graveyard Shift was the first story that ever appeared in Cavalier, first of many. And what's kind of cool about it is that it was published under the name Steve King. So he wasn't even Stephen King yet. And here is a look at the story, right? So it's got this piece of rat mouth artwork and a story by Steve King. And there you have it. So this is the first appearance of Graveyard Shift and the first King story that appeared in Cavalier magazine. And King to this day credits Nye Wilden with basically jump-starting his career, because you know, without these many stories appearing in this magazine pre-Carrie, you know, who knows, he might not have become the best-selling writer he is today. Well, of course he would have, but it may have gone, you know, it may have taken a little bit longer. So Stephen King is indebted to Wilden for publishing these you know, pre-Carrie short stories. So that is Graveyard Shift. Okay, so the next story in the book is Night Surf. Night Surf, as you guys know, is a sort of prequel slash original idea that later morphed into The Stand. The story was first published in a college literary magazine called Ubris, which I may be mispronouncing. I don't know if it's Ubris or Ubris or something else, but I always say Ubris. Anyway, this was a University of Maine literary magazine to which King contributed in four issues. This is the one that has Night Surf. And this is the spring 1969 issue of the magazine. It's a cheaply bound, stapled college digest. So it was published by students in the university. And there's a couple of interesting things looking at this. One is if you look at the other contributors here, you'll see that there's a girl named Mary Snell. So was that the person he was thinking of when he wrote Sue Snell from Carrie? Could be. Anyway, King's story, Night Surf here. He's also credited as Steve King, as he was back then. So here's Night Surf. There's no illustrations or anything in the story, but at the end of it, his byline is Steve King. So again, this was one of four issues of Ubris that King contributed fiction and poetry to. And it was not a professional magazine, it was a university magazine. So there you have Night Surf in Ubris. Okay, so the next story in the collection is I Am the Doorway. This story was first published in Cavalier Magazine. It was the second story that King sold to Cavalier after Gray Matter. It appeared in the March 1971 issue, so that was, 6 months, about half a year after Graveyard Shift in October 1970. Here is the issue. So this is March 71 of Cavalier. And also of interest, his name is not on the cover, but it says a sci-fi story you'll never forget. And that is talking about I Am the Doorway. So this is the first time. No, it's not. I think he was on the cover of Startling Mystery Stories 12. I think that's it. But as a large mainstream publication, Cavalier, I think this is the first time anything he wrote appeared on the cover of a magazine. So anyway, this is the issue, and here is the story as it first appeared. Also of note, it's the first time he is, his byline is Stephen King instead of Steve King. At that point, up until this point, everything he published was Steve King for the most part. So at some point between October of 1970 and March of 1971, he decided to use his full name, which probably sounds more professional. So anyway, that is I Am the Doorway in March 1971 issue of Cavalier. Okay, so the next story in the book is The Mangler, and this originally appeared in the December 1972 issue of Cavalier. Between I Am the Doorway and The Mangler, there were a number of other stories in Cavalier between late 71 and late 72. So this is not chronologically the next story that appeared in the magazine. There were quite a few between these two. However, December 1972 Cavalier. This is what the magazine looks like. And by now he has, his name is not on the cover, but the illustration from the story and the title of the story do appear on the magazine there, on the cover of the magazine. Let's take a quick peek. Sorry. And there we have it. So it's got a 2-page illustration, and there's the story as it first appeared anywhere in December 1972 issue of Cavalier. There you have it. Okay, so now we are going to look at the Boogeyman, which first appeared in Cavalier Magazine again in March of 1973. So here is the magazine, March 1973 Cavalier. It does feature a little piece of artwork that says the Boogeyman, but still no name of Stephen King. So we're still over a year away from Carrie seeing publication. And let's take a look at the story. Oh, sorry. I forgot what page it's on. I looked it up right before. That's right. There we go. So here it is. So you got a full page color illustration now, and The Boogeyman by Stephen King. So at this point, he's got his stories are probably selling copies, so he's getting more and more bigger spreads inside the magazine. So it's kind of cool to see how he grows from the first 1970 to now 2.5 years later into the spring of 73. So not really much else to say about this, but that is the Boogeyman. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the first appearance of Gray Matter, which first showed up in the October 1973 issue of Cavalier again. There's a lot of stuff from Cavalier in this collection. Here is the issue, October 1973 Cavalier, and once again we have the piece of artwork from the story appearing on the cover. Still no Stephen King though. So let's take a peek. 1973, so you could send in some money and learn how to be a computer programmer. Look at that. Wonder what that's all about. Anyway, okay. Here we go. So this is the story. They got the full page of color artwork and story on the opposite page. And that is Gray Matter. Okay, in the October 1973 issue of Cavalier. All right, and now we are going to look at Battleground, which first appeared in the September 1972 issue of Cavalier. Another Cavalier story. Here is the magazine. So this one, we're back, we're going back a little bit, and there's no indication of the King story here, no artwork from his story or anything like that. And it's just occurring to me as I look for the story that Stephen King collectors are probably the only people who actually own these magazines for the articles. I'm only reading it for the articles. It's true. Look at that. $20 in 1972, you could get an 8-track player. All right, Stephen King, that's what I'm looking for. Page 52. Page 52, here we go. So here we have Battleground. So this has a sort of 2-page spread of black and white artwork, and there's the story. So again, not, with these magazines, not really a ton of stuff to see. But yeah, it's got a little bit of artwork that carries over to the other page. So that's September 1972, Cavalier Magazine featuring Battleground. All right, and now we are going to be looking at the at the first appearance of Trucks. The story Trucks that appeared in the June 1973 issue of Cavalier. A lot of stories from Cavalier in Night Shift. Here is the issue. So, June 1973. This one has no indication of the story by King on the cover. And as you guys know, Trucks was the basis of the film Maximum Overdrive, which is on page 26 of this issue. 26. All right, so there's the story. It's got a full color, full page illustration on one side and the story on the other side, and that is Trucks in the June 1973 issue of Cavalier. Trucks. And now we are going to talk about Sometimes They Come Back, which was first published in the March 1974 issue of Cavalier Magazine again. And here is the issue. Cavalier Magazine, March 74. This one has no indication of the King story on the front. But I guess more importantly to them than Stephen King is a portfolio of vibes. This was closing in on the publication of Carrie, so we're about half a year. Is it half a year? Was Carrie November, December? Anyway, closing in on Carrie seeing print, and this was March of that year. So Sometimes They Come Back. Oop. Gotta make sure I keep the magazine lower than the camera because there's some potentially offensive photos in this magazine. All right, Sometimes We Come Back. Sometimes They Come Back, not we. They come back. So you have this really lovely full page, full color picture, and the story on the opposite page. Sometimes They Come Back. And that is it in March 74's issue of Cavalier. Okay, so next up we're looking at Strawberry Spring. Strawberry Spring first appeared in the fall 1968 edition of Ubris, Stephen King's college literary magazine. So we already looked at one of those issues earlier on. The fall 68 issue is this one. Again, these were cheaply done, cheaply bound digests. There's nothing on the cover except a picture of trees, so you wouldn't even know that this was an issue of Ubris unless you opened it up. Now we have fall 1968 Ubris. This is a little interesting. I'm doing these videos on the cuff, so I'm not preparing in any way. And just opening this up, I saw that the story was published under King's actual name, Stephen King, not Steve King. So kind of unusual for such a short, such an early story, rather. So this story, I believe, was quite heavily revised for Night Shift, but this is the first appearance of it. And at the end, you can see the byline of Stephen King, not Steve King. So here we have the fall 1968 issue of Ubris magazine, one of the more difficult to find early pre-Carrie rare, super rare magazines, which I love. I love collecting these things. They're so much fun to track down and find, and not too many people have them. So anyway, Strawberry Spring, there you go. Okay, so now we're going to look at Strawberry Spring as it appeared in the November 1975 issue of Cavalier. So the story originally appeared back in Ubris in 1968, but by 1975, King revisited the story and decided to revise it quite heavily. And then it was republished for the first time publicly in Cavalier. So here is the November 1975 issue. I'm just going to keep this brief because there is a bit of nudity on the cover. So now you've seen it. I don't want to get the channel flagged for naughtiness here. But we'll take a look at the story. So this version of the story was quite revised from the original 1968 version. And obviously this was the first time the general public would be able to read this magazine, because unless you went to the University of Maine in 1968, you were not going to be reading this in Ubris magazine, which was a tiny little college journal. So here is the revised version of Strawberry Spring in the November 1975 issue of Cavalier, which I can just do that, and now you can see it. And I believe this is the version of the story that did appear in Night Shift a couple of years later. Okay. All right, so now we are going to discuss The Ledge. The Ledge appeared first in the July 1976 issue of Penthouse Magazine. So we finally get a break from Cavalier, and we're looking at Penthouse now. This issue, so by the time this was published, Salem's Lot was already out, I believe in paperback at this point, and still no indication of King at all on the cover. I guess an exclusive interview with George Washington was more important than Stephen King. And it's the special bisextennial issue. Bet the guy who came up with that got a bonus, huh? Anyway, the back of the magazine has a cigarette ad. And let's see, let's take a peek and find The Ledge. The Ledge, page 146. Look at that, right to it. So here's The Ledge. It has a 2-page full-color illustration. So, I guess they did realize that he was building a successful career as a novelist by now. And Carrie was, the film was either just released or about to be released. I can't remember when it was in 76, but this is probably the last time Stephen King's name wasn't prominent on a magazine cover. I don't know that for sure, I'm just guessing. But anyway, July 1976 Penthouse, featuring the first ever appearance of The Ledge. All right, so now we're going to look at The Lawnmower Man, which first appeared in the May 1975 issue of Cavalier Magazine. I'm a little concerned about this issue because it does have a naked model on the front, and I don't want the video to become flagged by YouTube. So, first of all, if seeing a topless woman will offend you, please stop watching now. And otherwise, I'll try to keep the cover brief so that the video doesn't get removed from YouTube. But anyway, here is the May 1975 issue of Cavalier. I'm just going to hold that up so you can see it real quick, and then we'll take a peek at the story itself. Lawnmower Man, page 56. Let's see. Bear with me here. Sorry, guys. 56. Okay, so here is the story with a full-page black and white illustration on one side. Man, that is some illustration. And the story starts there. So that is the Lawnmower Man in the May 1975 issue of Cavalier, which I will not show you again. And of note, the story was then later adapted in 1981 in this issue of Bizarre Adventures. So it's a comic adaptation of The Lawnmower Man in Comic Adventures number 29. Not the first appearance of the prose version of the story, but a pretty cool little piece nonetheless. So there you have The Lawnmower Man in its first and kind of second appearances. Okay, so Quitters, Inc. appeared for the first time in the collection Night Shift. It was never previously published, which brings us to I Know What You Need. I Know What You Need appeared for the first time in the Gotta look. September 1976 issue of Cosmopolitan. So here we have a magazine that is not Cavalier and not a men's magazine. So kind of a departure, and this is what the magazine looked like. So it's a nice thick magazine. It's got a spine. It's, it's got Stephen King's name on the front. So by September of 76, he was worthy of being on the front cover, even though it's just at the bottom underneath a lot of other nonsense. But the luscious art of kissing. So there you go. Much more important than Stephen King. And the back has a cigarette ad with a whole bunch of very healthy looking teenagers smoking. All right. So let's check the story out. I Know What You Need. Page 234. That is a long magazine. 234. Imagine reading this thing every month. Damn. All right. Here's the story. So it's got a full color, full page illustration. And then the story begins on the opposite page. And honestly, it's been so long since I read this story, I don't even remember what it's about. I have no memory of it. But I know I've read it just a long time ago. Anyway, that's I Know What You Need in September 1976, Cosmopolitan. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Children of the Corn, which, as you guys know, is the basis for the very best ever Stephen King movie adaptation. I kid, of course. This story first appeared in the March 1977 issue of Penthouse Magazine. Here you have it. March 1977, so the year of The Shining. This was before The Shining came out, and still no mention of Stephen King on the cover. I guess the breaking of a president. They're talking about Nixon. A Richard Nixon article in 1977 was more appealing than a Stephen King short story. Go figure. All right, so, the new Datsun. Look at that. Oh my God. I'm easily amused, in case you guys haven't figured that out. Let's see. Where is Children of the Corn? Children of the Corn, page 64. 64. And here we have it. Oh, look at that. That's a pretty badass illustration. Let's see. Can you see that? That is cool. Pretty cool corn cob hand picture there. And there's the story on the opposite side. So, that is the first appearance of Children of the Corn in Penthouse from March of 1977. Okay, so then the last rung on the ladder is a original story, first published in Night Shift. That brings us to The Man Who Loved Flowers, which first appeared in Cavalier Magazine, August 1977. So this is the issue. Try to get rid of the glare. This is the issue of Gallery. No indication of Stephen King on the cover, but I suppose new public sex clubs is more important than Stephen King. New public sex clubs. Have you ever been to one? Because I sure haven't. Maybe it was a short-lived thing in the summer of 77. So let's take a peek and see the story, page 68. So here it is. It's got a two-page full-color illustration, And there's the story on that side. The Man Who Loved Flowers. And on the back, cool cigarettes. A nice, healthy outdoor waterfall, making you think of something refreshing and healthy, like a box of Cools. Anyway, Gallery, 1977, The Man Who Loved Flowers. Okay, so now we are going to take a look at One for the Road, and this one I have to get serious about because it first appeared in the March-April 1977 issue of Maine magazine. So this is one of the trinity of uber rare, super duper crazy obscure magazines that have original Stephen King short stories. The other two being the Maine Review from 1975 and Marsh Roots from 1973. So this is the third, and this is the one that took me the longest to find. I had the other two before I got this one. Some people say Marsh Roots is by far the hardest of those. I found this one to be the most difficult to find and the one that took me the longest to find. So it is the March-April 1977 issue of Maine magazine. And here it is. I only know one other collector that has this. It's crazy rare, crazy rare. So if you have one of these, man, good for you. And if you don't, good luck finding one, because it's near impossible. I believe they only published this local magazine. I think it was just 1 year. There were only 12 issues. The circulation was very small. I can't remember exactly how many copies were printed of this, but it was very few. And most of them, as you can imagine, were read and discarded quickly. So from 1977, how many of these survived? I don't think many. I would be shocked if more than five or six of these exist in the world. So Maine magazine. And this has One for the Road on page 42. And here it is. So it's a 2-page spread. It's got a full color illustration on one page, and the story starts on the opposite page. So there's a look at the story. Probably the rarest, or one of the rarest original appearances of a Stephen King story that you will ever see. So enjoy this look at Maine magazine featuring One for the Road. So today we're going to look at Stephen King's first professional story sale, which was The Glass Floor, which appeared as a bonus story in the Cemetery Dance edition of Night Shift. This story was first published in a 1967 issue of Startling Mystery Stories, issue 6, and it was his first sale. So there's no indication of his name on the front, of course, because no one knew who he was. His byline is actually Stephen King here, not Steve King. And there is the story. So I believe he received $35 for this in payment in 1967. He was still in college. And this is where it first appeared. Startling Mystery Stories. So he sold two short stories to this magazine. The second being The Reaper's Image in 1969. And it was a little digest. Very small, something you would find on a newsstand, or at a bus stop or in a convenience store. A number of now very famous writers published early short stories in this. including F. Paul Wilson, one of my favorites. But anyway, this is The Glass Floor in issue 6 of Startling Mystery Stories. Okay, so the other story that was a bonus in the CD Night Shift was Weeds, which appeared for the first time in the May 1976 issue of Cavalier. There is some nudity on the front of this, so I'm going to keep the cover brief. This is what it looked like. And the story, the interesting thing about this is that for a while there was some confusion about the title. So we have, it starts with a full page illustration, and the text says, more than a green thumb. We have another full page illustration here, and it says, will be necessary to stop the weeds. So what's the title of the story? Some people thought it was more than a green thumb will be necessary to stop the weeds, and some people thought it was will be necessary to stop the weeds. So a bit ambiguous here with the story title. But anyway, this was the story, of course, that was the basis for the Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill and Creepshow, and was uncollected for quite some time, other than as a comic in the Creepshow paperback. But this is where the story first appeared in print, and since then it's been reprinted a number of times, including in the I'll do that, including in the CD edition of Night Shift. So here we have the May 1976 issue of Cavalier Magazine with Weeds.